My name is Claire Whitfield, and I'm 33 years old. On Mother's Day, in front of 600 guests at my mother-in-law's charity gala, my husband slapped me across the face. The microphone on the stage was still live, and the sound of it went through 12 speakers mounted around that ballroom. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then my mother-in-law, Margaret Whitfield, raised her champagne glass, and 600 people laughed. I stood there with blood on my lip, and I thought one thing, very clearly. None of you know who my mother is. 40-8 hours later, my husband would be standing in front of a judge. Margaret Whitfield would lose the foundation she'd spent 21 years building, and I would be sitting in my mother's kitchen, eating stuffed cabbage rolls, in a house where nobody controlled the guest list. But I need to back up, because none of this started at that gala. It started 3 years earlier, on the day I married into the Whitfield family. Welcome to her side of the story, for every woman who held it together, alone. If you've ever been told you weren't good enough for someone's family, this one's for you. Stay with me to the end. I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment in Dayton, Ohio, with a mother who worked 3 jobs so that I would only ever have to work 1. My mother's name is Diane Bennett. She came to this country from Poland at 23 years old, with $400 and a pocket dictionary. She worked days as a court interpreter and spent her nights at the public library, studying for the bar exam 2 bus transfers away from our apartment. She passed on her second attempt. She was 30-1. Diane had one rule in our house, and I heard it so many times growing up that I can still hear the exact rhythm of her voice saying it. No crying without a plan. Tears are information. They tell you something is wrong. Then you fix it. I didn't understand what that meant until I was much older. I graduated from Ohio State on a full scholarship, summa cum laude, healthcare administration. My first job paid $51,000 a year at a hospital network in Columbus, in the compliance department, where I reviewed financial records for irregularities. My mother had spent 2 decades inside courtrooms. She never talked much about the details of her work. She'd just say, "I helped people find the truth when they couldn't find it on their own." I thought the hardest chapter of my life was behind me. I had the degree, the career, the apartment with only my name on the lease. Then I met Blake Whitfield at a hospital fundraiser, and everything I thought I understood about hard started over. Blake was charming in a way that catches you off guard. He asked real questions. He remembered things I'd mentioned weeks earlier and brought them up again like they mattered. 6 months of Sunday coffee and midnight phone calls later, he proposed on a park bench with a ring that cost more than my car. The first warning sign came dressed as a joke. "My mom's going to want to approve the ring first," he said, laughing. I laughed too. He didn't laugh back. Margaret Whitfield inserted herself into our wedding within 72 hours of the engagement. She chose the venue, Ashford Country Club, where she was a founding member. She rewrote the guest list. She changed the menu twice. I'd wanted my mother's stuffed cabbage rolls on the appetizer table. Margaret said it would confuse the caterers. I let it go. I let all of it go, because I believed compromise was the entry fee for joining a family. I believed if I was patient enough, agreeable enough, small enough, she'd eventually decide I belonged. On my wedding morning, my mother pressed a handkerchief into my palm, white linen. Her name, Diane, hand-stitched in pale blue thread along the corner. "Wipe your tears," she said. "Then make your plan." I thought she meant happy tears. I didn't understand yet. Blake's father, Richard Whitfield, had died of a heart attack at 54. 21 years before I married his son. He'd left behind a trust worth close to $3 million, a building supply company, and a wife who'd spent 30 years as a homemaker. Margaret became sole trustee of everything. The trust paid for Blake's schooling, his first car, our down payment, and a monthly wire she called the supplement, $3,000 a month, deposited into Blake's account, on top of his regular salary from the family company. Blake's younger sister Brooke got the same arrangement. Anything beyond the supplement required asking Margaret directly. A new roof, a vacation, a donation over $500. She called it stewardship. "I'm protecting what Richard built," she'd say to anyone who asked, and nobody asked twice, because her tone ended conversations before they started. I learned much later that Margaret hadn't always been this way. When she married Richard, his mother had treated her exactly the same way she now treated me, calling her the girl from the wrong side of the tracks. Margaret had survived that by becoming her. She built a fortress around the family money, and she locked the door from the inside. Brooke was 30, working as an event coordinator for her mother's charity foundation, living in a townhouse Margaret had purchased outright. Brooke had also introduced Blake to a college friend of hers years before we met. Blake chose me instead. Brooke never said it out loud, but I felt it in every room we shared. Our first Thanksgiving at the Whitfield house taught me everything I needed to know. I brought my mother's cabbage rolls, 12 of them, simmered for 4 hours, wrapped in foil in a glass dish. I set them beside the turkey and the cranberry sauce. Margaret lifted the foil, looked at the dish, and set it back down. Then she turned to the table to Blake, to Brooke, to a cousin and an uncle, and said 5 words in the same tone you'd use to ask someone to pass the salt. "She's not one of us," Brooke laughed. Blake stared at his plate. Nobody defended me. Margaret turned to Brooke. "Get the real food from the kitchen, honey." I carried my mother's dish back to the kitchen myself, covered it, walked to my car, and sat there for 10 minutes with the engine off. I didn't cry. I thought about what my mother would say. Tears are information. I had the information. Margaret Whitfield didn't see me as family. She saw me as a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. That night, I opened my laptop and created a folder on my desktop. I named it Insurance. I didn't know yet what would go inside it. I only knew that a woman who says she's not one of us at Thanksgiving will eventually say something worse. Once she thinks nobody's counting. Year 2 started with a house. Blake wanted to buy a 4-bedroom colonial for around $410,000. And his plan was simple. Ask Margaret to release funds from the trust for the down payment. I suggested something else. We had $85,000 saved between us. We could put 20% down on something smaller, something that was ours, with both our names on it and no one else's. Blake looked at me like I'd suggested we move into a tent. "Mom will think I'm rejecting her." "You're buying a house, Blake, with your wife. That's not rejection." He called Margaret that night. By morning, she'd already contacted a realtor. She picked the neighborhood, negotiated the mortgage terms, and co-signed the loan, which meant her name went on the deed, right alongside his. I opened a separate savings account that following Monday. I started maxing out my 401k. I built a professional network of my own that had nothing to do with the Whitfield name. There was one night that year that almost changed everything. Blake called me at 2 in the morning. His voice cracked open in a way I'd never heard. He'd been dreaming about his father. "Dad would have liked you, Claire. He wasn't like Mom. He was quiet. He listened." I held him until his breathing evened out against my shoulder. And for one moment I saw the man he could have been without 21 years of his mother's voice in his ear. By 7 the next morning, Margaret called. Blake answered. And the man from the night before disappeared. The group chat surfaced in April. Blake's phone buzzed 3 times during dinner. He tilted the screen away, but not fast enough. I caught the name before he swiped it shut. The real family, for members. Margaret, Blake, Brooke, and a cousin. "Know me," I said nothing that night. Once Blake was asleep, I picked up his phone from the nightstand. The passcode was his father's birthday. He used it for everything. I read 3 weeks of messages. Brooke had posted a photo of me from brunch with the caption "Clearance Rack Energy." And 3 laughing emojis had followed, one from Margaret, one from Blake, one from the cousin. 2 days before that, Margaret had written, "Diane's recipes are so ethnic. I don't know why she insists." Blake's reply was a thumbs up and a laughing face. I screenshotted every message. 40-something images, transferred to my laptop, saved in the insurance folder. Then I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and walked to the bathroom mirror. My hands were steady. My husband was laughing at me with the people who were supposed to be my family. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep, but I was very still. Every spring, Margaret hosted the Mother's Day charity gala at Ashford Country Club Black Tie. 600 guests, $200 a plate, benefiting the children's wing at a local hospital. She'd chaired it for 14 years. It was her kingdom, her name on the program, her photo on the banner, her speech from the stage. This year, Brooke was event coordinator. Margaret assigned me to volunteer duty, greeting guests, printing name tags, building the seating chart. The kind of work you hand someone you want visible but voiceless. I said yes to everything. Every envelope I stuffed, every spreadsheet I built, put me one step closer to information I'd spent my whole career learning how to find. 3 weeks before the gala, I was in Margaret's home office retrieving a box of printed programs when I noticed a folder open on her desk. Foundation financial records. Donations received, year to date, $340,000. Vendor payments to 4 companies for gala services. I didn't take anything. I didn't photograph it. I just read the numbers the way I read numbers every single day at work. That evening, I walked past the LED donor board in the club lobby. It cycled through names and a running total. The displayed number, $280,000. A $60,000 gap between what the folder said and what the board said. In my line of work, that gap has a name. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I drove to my mother's house in Dayton that Saturday. Diane made coffee, sat me down at her kitchen table, and listened without interrupting while I laid out 3 years and 40 minutes, the Thanksgiving insult, the group chat, Blake's silence, the missing $60,000. When I finished, she asked one question. Do you have documentation? A folder. 3 years of it, time-stamped. She nodded. What do you want, Claire? I'd been rehearsing the answer for weeks, but saying it out loud still felt enormous. I want to leave. But I want to leave standing up. Then you will, she said. But not tonight. You need one more thing. You need them to show who they are. In a room full of people who can't unsee it. If this is landing for you, if you've ever sat at a table wondering whether you actually belonged there, that's exactly what her side of the story is for. For every woman who held it together, alone, and is finally ready to stop. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and stick with me. Because this is the part where the gap in that donor board stops being a mystery. 2 weeks before the gala, the seating chart landed in my inbox. My table 47, back left corner of the ballroom, behind a support pillar, next to the service entrance. Blake was seated at table 1, front and center, Margaret on his right, Brooke on his left. I called him. Why am I at table 40? He sighed. It's a family table, Claire. Mom wanted immediate family up front for the toast. You understand? I understood perfectly. Brooke called the next day with my assignment door duty. Greeting arrivals for the first 90 minutes. You're so good with people, Claire, she said. In a tone that meant the opposite. I accepted every assignment. Door duty meant I'd see every guest walk in. It meant I'd be the first face people remembered. That Thursday, I asked Brooke for access to the donor database. I wanted to help with thank you cards afterward. I told her, cross-referencing names with donation amounts. She approved it without a second thought and emailed me the login 12 days before the event. I opened it at 11 that night. At our kitchen table while Blake slept upstairs. The platform tracked 6 years of donations, pledges, and vendor payments. This year's total, $340,000 confirmed, matching what I'd seen on Margaret's desk. Then I pulled the vendor payments for companies, paid for florals, catering, audiovisual, and linens. Total, $212,000. Standard pricing. Standard terms. Except 2 of the 4 companies didn't exist. The first was registered to a P.O. box with no website, no phone number, no filing on record with the state. The second listed a commercial address that, on a map, turned out to be a shuttered dry cleaner. Payments to those 2 entities totaled roughly $58,000 over 3 years, split into small invoices. Each one just under the threshold that would trigger an independent audit. I know that pattern from my job. We call it shell disbursement. Small routine-looking payments to entities that exist only on paper, designed to pass as normal until somebody actually checks. I built a report, exactly the way I'd format a compliance brief at work dates. Amounts, vendor names, cross-referenced with verified expenses. I saved it to the insurance folder, copied it to an encrypted drive, and mailed it to my mother's address. The numbers had told me the truth. I'd finally listened. 1 week before the gala, Blake came home late, smelling like bourbon. "We need to talk about the seating," I said. "Not tonight. Your mother put me at the farthest table from the stage, behind a pillar, at her own party. It's one night, Claire. Can you not make it about you?" "It's not about me. It's about what it tells 600 people about our marriage." He rubbed his face and said something that made the kitchen go cold. "Mom says you've been talking about our finances at work. Telling people things." That was a lie. I had never once mentioned the Whitfields to a single coworker. Margaret had planted it, and Blake had planted it back into me without blinking. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Textbook. I slept in the guest room that night. 5 days before the gala, I overheard Brooke on speakerphone with Margaret, through a half-open pantry door. Neither of them knew I was standing 10 feet away. "Mom, you should do a toast about real mothers. Women who actually raise their kids here, with real values, not like some people's mothers." They laughed the exact same pitch, the exact same rhythm. "I've already written it," Margaret said. "The theme is what real family means." Brooke lowered her voice. "Blake always gets emotional about Dad on Mother's Day. If she reacts, and she will. Everyone finally sees what I've been saying for 3 years. That she doesn't belong." I set the glass I was holding down without a sound and stepped back into the hallway. This wasn't a slip. It was choreography. They wanted me to cry. They wanted a scene. They wanted proof of their own story. I decided I'd give them the opposite. I would sit at table 4. I would listen to every word from that podium. And I'd let them believe they'd already won, because while they were planning a performance, I was planning an exit. The night before the gala, at a family dinner, Brooke mentioned my mother, the way you'd mention the weather. "Diane's still in that little apartment in Dayton. Must be nice to have simple tastes." Margaret set down her wine glass. "Some people are just built for smaller lives." Then Brooke, looking straight at me, said it, the same 5 words from that Thanksgiving. Word for word. "She's not one of us." The daughter had learned the mother's exact language. I excused myself to the bathroom, pressed my back against the door, and held my mother's handkerchief between my hands. I didn't cry. I texted her, "Tomorrow I'll be ready." She answered in 12 seconds. 1 word. Good. I couldn't sleep that night. Around 1 in the morning, looking for my phone charger, I walked into Blake's home office and found it plugged in behind his desk. Crouching to reach it, my hand brushed the bottom drawer slightly open. Underneath a stack of old tax returns sat a yellowed envelope in faded handwriting. "For Blake, to be opened when you marry." His father's handwriting. A man who'd been dead for 21 years. I shouldn't have opened it, but I was sitting on the floor of a house that had my husband's name on the deed, and his mother's name on the mortgage. 12 hours before my lip would be split open, I opened it. 2 pages, written 6 months before Richard's heart attack, about Margaret. Her strength, her fear, the way she controlled the things she loved because she was terrified of losing them. And then, near the bottom, "Your mother is a strong woman, but strength isn't the same as kindness. If your wife ever tells you she's hurting, believe her. Don't make the mistake I made." Richard Whitfield had seen his wife clearly. He just hadn't been brave enough to act on it. 21 years later, his son was making the same choice. I photographed both pages, put the letter back exactly as I'd found it, and went back to the guest room. I didn't sleep. But now I had something I hadn't had before. Ashford's ballroom had been transformed. Dimmed chandeliers, 60 round tables in white linen, a stage with a mahogany podium and 2 wireless microphones. Margaret arrived at 5:45 in an emerald gown, moving through the room like she owned the building. She hadn't donated the building. She'd donated enough to it that nobody bothered with the distinction. I arrived in a simple navy dress and flats, took my post at the entrance, and greeted every guest for 90 minutes. The mayor, 2 state senators, a retired schoolteacher named Carol Hensley, who shook my hand and said, "You must be Blake's wife. He's a lucky man." I smiled and thanked her. Blake never came to greet me. He never texted. During a lull, I walked past the lobby and photographed the LED donor board, $280,000, time-stamped, and sent it to my mother with no caption. she'd know exactly what it meant. Dinner started at 7:30. I sat with strangers at table 47, a dentist and his wife, Carol Hensley again, a florist named Diane who'd done the centerpieces and was eating fast because she still had to break them down afterward. They asked about my work, how long Blake and I had been married. Nobody mentioned that I was the only spouse in the building, seated 300 feet from her husband. At 8:15, Margaret took the stage. Good evening, everyone. Happy Mother's Day. Warm applause. Tonight is about the women who sacrifice everything for their families, who stay up late, who hold everything together when nobody else will. More applause. But not everyone understands sacrifice. The room shifted. Some women marry into families they don't appreciate. They bring outside customs and expect the rest of us to adapt. The temperature in that ballroom dropped 10 degrees. Margaret looked directly at me, across 60 tables, 600 faces. I raised my son to value tradition, loyalty, family. I pray he remembers where he comes from. Blake, at table 1, was nodding. Not uncomfortable, nodding she wasn't finished. She had the room, and she knew it. A real mother raises her children in this country, in this community, with values we can all understand, not in a one-bedroom apartment, working as a she paused, feigning to search for the word, translator. She was talking about my mother. At a Mother's Day speech about mothers, the woman beside me put a hand over her mouth. Carol Hensley reached over and pressed her palm flat against my arm. Are you okay, honey? I was still. My hands stayed in my lap. My breathing didn't change. I could feel my mother's handkerchief in my jacket pocket, pressed against my ribs. Margaret raised her glass. To real mothers. To real family. The room drank some eagerly, some with the look of people who wished they were anywhere else. I stood up. 600 pairs of eyes tracked me from table 47 to the podium. My footsteps on that marble floor were the only sound in the room. I stopped below the stage and spoke clearly. Margaret. My mother worked 3 jobs to put herself through law school. She didn't need a trust fund or a charity gala to prove she was a good mother. She just showed up, every single day. And she did. My voice didn't shake. Margaret's face collapsed into performance, hand to her chest, tears arriving fast and perfectly timed. Do you see what she does to me? She attacks me on Mother's Day, in my own event. Blake stood up from table 1, 4 glasses of champagne deep, and moved between tables like he was on rails, aimed straight at me. Apologized to my mother. Now, I looked at him, the man who'd cried about his father at 2 in the morning. The man who'd answered a group chat insult about me with a thumbs up. No. His right hand crossed the left side of my face. Open palm, full contact. The podium microphone was still live, and the sound went through every speaker in that room. Tuned for 600 people. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Margaret smiled, small, satisfied. Brooke, near the bar, covered her mouth, eyes laughing. A few tables near the front laughed nervously, the way people laugh when they don't know what else to do. My lips split. I tasted copper. Carol Hensley was the only person in that entire room who stood up. Oh my God. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my mother's handkerchief, and pressed it to my mouth. The blood was bright against the white linen. I folded it and put it back in my pocket. I didn't scream. I looked at Blake. I looked at Margaret. I looked at 600 faces in $200 seats, not one of whom had moved to stand between us. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, spine straight. Brooke's voice carried across the room behind me. Drama queen. Can't even take a joke, Blake called out. Claire, come back, you're overreacting. And from the stage, still holding the live microphone, Margaret said the words that would end up quoted back to her by a police officer 40 minutes later. Let her go. She'll come crawling back. They always do. I pushed through the double doors into the May night. The parking lot was half full, hazard lights blinking on a catering van near the service entrance. I stood there 30 seconds, lip bleeding, cheek beginning to swell, handkerchief damp in my pocket. I called my mother. Mom, please come. I'd never said please to her in that tone in 33 years. She didn't ask what happened. She just asked, are you hurt? He hit me. 3 seconds of silence. Her breathing. steady, in front of me on the line. Then her voice went flat. Not angry. The voice she used when she was deciding, not feeling. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't wash your face. Don't change your clothes. Sit in your car. Lock the doors. Do you understand me? Yes, good. I love you. I'm coming. I sat in my car in the dark with blood drying on my chin. And I counted the minutes. I learned the rest from Carol Hensley the following week. Over tea in her living room, because she wanted to make sure I got every detail right. After I left, Margaret returned to the microphone, adjusted her earrings, and said, "Well, now that the drama's over, let's get back to celebrating real mothers." The applause was thin. Several guests didn't clap at all. Blake sat back down. Brooke brought him a glass of water and told him, "You did the right thing." Carol counted 7 guests who quietly left within 12 minutes. A county official's wife and husband, 2 hospital board members, a local attorney who left a $20 bill at coat check without collecting his coat. Then Carol walked up to table 1 herself. "Young man," she told Blake, "I've taught for 35 years. I've watched boys become men, and I've watched men become boys. What you just did was a boy." Blake told her to mind her own business. She picked up her clutch, walked to the lobby, sat down, and made 2 phone calls that would matter a great deal in about 40 minutes. My mother's sedan pulled into the lot exactly on time. She stepped out in a plain coat over a house dress. No makeup. Reading glasses pushed up on her head. She'd come straight from home. She tapped my window twice, firm, and crouched down to my level once I unlocked the door. She cupped my face in both hands, said nothing for 10 seconds, and then, calm as a courtroom. "Okay, here's what we do. First, I photograph your injuries. My phone has a time. Second, we go back inside. Not to confront anyone, to get his full legal name, the venue address, and at least 3 witnesses. Third, we drive straight to the police station tonight. Not tomorrow. I don't want to go back in there. You won't be alone this time." We walked back through those double doors together. The band was still playing. Champagne was still catching chandelier light. It looked for one moment like nothing had happened. Then, table by table, the room went quiet as people noticed us. Margaret saw me first. Then my mother, a woman she'd met exactly twice and referred to both times as the translator. Margaret crossed the floor in 4 strides. "If you've come back to apologize, do it privately. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening." My mother spoke clearly, not loudly. "Mrs. Whitfield, my name is Diane Bennett. I'm here because your son struck my daughter, in this room, in front of these people, 40 minutes ago." The band stopped playing. "That's a family matter," Margaret snapped. "You have no business here." "Battery isn't a family matter, Mrs. Whitfield. It's a criminal one." My mother paused, and the room listened, and I'd know. I spent 18 years on the bench, hearing cases exactly like this one. The silence that followed was different from the silence after the slap. That one had been shock. This one was understanding. Blake knocked his champagne glass over, reaching for me. "Claire, let's talk about this at home." "She isn't going home with you tonight," my mother said. Margaret's tears came back louder. "Do you see what they're doing? Attacking us on Mother's Day. Your father would be ashamed." I spoke for the first time since arriving. "Richard's letter says something different." Margaret went white, not red, white, like someone had pulled a plug. "What letter?" "The one in Blake's desk. The one his father wrote before he died, about how his biggest regret was never standing up to you." 600 people heard that sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "That letter is private property. You had no right. We're not here about the letter," my mother said. "We're here because your son committed assault in front of 600 witnesses. We're filing a police report tonight. Everything else is a conversation for attorneys." Blake looked at his mother, then at me, then at my mother, a man standing on ground he just felt shift under him. Brooke stepped in, damage control mode. "This is ridiculous." He barely touched her. "She's making a scene for attention, like always." My mother turned to her. "Are you a witness to what happened tonight?" "Yes," Brooke said instantly, and it was nothing. "Good," my mother said. "Your statement's been noted." I watched the realization move across Brooke's face. She'd just confirm, in front of 600 people, that she'd witnessed her brother strike me and thought it was fine. I spoke again. Margaret, you should also know I've been reviewing the Gala's financial records. The database shows $340,000 received this year. The board in your lobby, the one 600 people walked past tonight, shows 280. I've documented the gap, along with payments to 2 vendors that don't appear to exist. Margaret looked at the board through the open ballroom doors, still glowing, still wrong. You went through my records. I was a volunteer, Margaret. Brooke gave me the database password. Brooke's clipboard hit the floor. Margaret came apart, not the way people do in movies. No single cinematic moment, but the way a wall cracks in 20 places at once, after 21 years of pressure. She's lying. She's a vindictive, ungrateful. She wormed her way into this family. Mom, stop. Blake's voice, louder than I'd ever heard it. But she couldn't. You raised a snake, Margaret said to my mother. Your daughter is destroying everything Richard left. My mother didn't move. Your son hit my daughter in this room, in front of these people. That's what happened tonight. Everything else is a conversation for lawyers. A man at a nearby table stood mid-50s, off-duty badge in his jacket. Ma'am, would you like me to call this in? I can have a unit here in 10 minutes. Yes, please, I said. The podium microphone had stayed live through the entire exchange. Every word of Margaret's unraveling had gone out through those same 12 speakers at full volume. Officer Daniels arrived 12 minutes later. Carol Hensley met him in the lobby. I saw everything. I'll give a statement. He photographed my face. The bruise, the split lip noted the time, and turned to Blake. Sir, did you strike this woman? Blake looked at his mother. Margaret's eyes urged him to deny it, reframe it, explain it away. But the microphone had broadcast the slap to 600 people. 3 phones had caught it on video. Carol Hensley was standing 6 feet away with her arms crossed. Yes, sir, Blake said. You're being placed under arrest for domestic battery. Turn around, hands behind your back, please. The cuffs clicked a small sound. In that ballroom, it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I said it quietly. Not for the room, just for myself, but loud enough. You're right, Margaret. I was never one of you. Thank God for that. For 3 seconds. Margaret's face showed something I'd never seen on it before. Not anger. Not performance. Fear. The real terror of a 60-year-old woman watching the only person she had left get walked out in handcuffs. Then it was gone, replaced by, "This is your fault, Claire. You planned this." My mother stepped close enough that only Margaret could hear her. You don't hit someone and get to call it love. Margaret reached for the podium microphone out of pure habit. Her hand caught the stand. It tipped, hit the floor, and the feedback screech cut through the room like glass breaking. Nobody picked it back up. We walked out past the donor board, still glowing its wrong number, past clusters of whispering guests, past coats still hanging unclaimed at the check, into the May night dot at the station. Under greenish fluorescent light, I gave my statement full name, address, date, location, witnesses. My mother sat beside me, silent, because she couldn't legally act as my counsel, but could absolutely sit in that plastic chair and make sure I wasn't alone. When I finished signing, she took the handkerchief out of my pocket, folded it once, twice, 3 times, and pressed it back into my hand. You won't need this anymore. Did you know, I asked her, when you gave this to me at my wedding, that it would end like this? I hoped it wouldn't, but I raised you to be ready, in case it did. I called a divorce attorney the next morning, a woman named Janet Ellis I'd first consulted. Quietly, 14 months earlier, Blake was charged with domestic battery, a first-degree misdemeanor in Ohio, backed by 600 witnesses, 3 phone videos, and Carol Hensley's written statement. His attorney recommended a plea, community service, mandatory counseling, a restraining order. The divorce moved fast. My documentation, 3 years of it, made sure of that. I kept my savings, my career, my name. I didn't ask for a single dollar of Richard Whitfield's trust. I never wanted their money. I wanted my life back. The foundation audit came from a different door. I submitted my compliance report, the vendor discrepancies, the shell companies, the $60,000 gap, to the state attorney general's office. It wasn't revenge. When you find financial irregularities in a charity, you report them. That's simply the job. The investigation opened. Margaret wasn't criminally charged, but the foundation was placed under independent oversight. The annual gala was suspended, and she was asked to step down as chair. Brooke lost her coordinator position when the foundation restructured and found smaller work at an event firm 2 towns over. She wasn't destroyed. For the first time in her life, she was just standing on ground that didn't have her mother's name on the deed. The donor board came down the week. The audit was announced. 3 months later, I moved back to Dayton, a 1-bedroom apartment. Small kitchen, a window that looked out on a maple tree. Not so different from the one I grew up in, except this one had only my name on the lease. I took a job as compliance director at a regional, healthcare nonprofit, the exact role I'd spent 3 years quietly building toward. One contact at a time, without a single dollar of Whitfield money behind it, every Sunday. I drive to my mother's for dinner. She still makes the same cabbage rolls Margaret rejected that first Thanksgiving. We eat at her kitchen table with the law journals still on the shelf. And nobody at that table decides who belongs and who doesn't. How do you feel? She asked me one Sunday, like I can breathe. A card came in the mail that week, small envelope, handwritten, from Carol Hensley. Proud of you, dear. Some lessons take courage to teach. I pinned it to my refrigerator. It's still there. I used to think staying was the same thing as strength. I thought if I absorbed enough, endured enough, it would eventually prove something. My worth, my patience, my love. It doesn't. Dignity isn't how much you can carry. Dignity is knowing exactly when to put it down and walk out the door. My mother taught me both halves of that lesson. That's my story. 3 years of silence, 600 witnesses, 1 phone call that changed everything. Mom, please come. If this reminded you that you deserve better, from a partner, from a family, from yourself, take that as your sign. This has been her side of the story for every woman who held it together, alone. If you're still with me, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next.